Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the velvet curtain on one of the most glamorous lies ever sold. The golden age of Hollywood. Not the version with the red carpets, the swelling orchestras and the tearful acceptance speeches. I mean the real one, where the smiles were contractually obligated, breakfast was mostly cigarettes, and the studio owned you right down to the shape of your own nose. Before we begin, a warm and sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. This channel runs entirely on your ideas, and it genuinely means the world that you keep sending them in. If you enjoy what I do here, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. And if you'd rather drift off with me on Spotify, the channel lives there too, with a link waiting patiently in the description. And if you'd like a little more, membership is already available on the channel, which gives you access to 8 hours of ad-free video to drift off to, uninterrupted, whenever you like. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and try to enjoy the fact that your teeth are still, for now, your own. Let's wonder about a few things together. Ever wondered what it actually felt like to be famous back when fame came with a 7-year contract and a mandatory morning weigh-in? Did the stars really live in marble mansions, or did most of them share a boarding house and one temperamental telephone? Could you survive on black coffee, willpower, and a little pill the studio doctor swore was basically a vitamin? Would you last a single week being told that your name, your age, your hometown, and your entire love life were all being quietly rewritten by a man in a corner office? And now, congratulations, you've just stepped off a dusty bus in Hollywood. The year is 1937. You have a cardboard suitcase, $11, and a smile that is about to become studio property. Good luck. You step off the bus and straight into a wall of California sunshine so bright it feels like the town itself is trying to blind you before it gets the chance to disappoint you. Everyone here looks like they're exactly one lucky break away from stardom, which is a polite way of saying everyone here is broke and pretending not to be. You have your looks, your ambition, and a letter from a talent scout that may or may not be entirely real. All around you, 1,000 other hopefuls clutch the same dream in the same one good outfit, smiling through the same growling stomach. Welcome to Hollywood, where the sidewalks are paved with rejection. The rent is due tomorrow, and the only thing cheaper than a room is a promise. The first thing that betrays you is your suitcase. It is cardboard, it is honest, and it announces to the entire boulevard that you are fresh off the bus with your whole life folded inside it. You find a boarding house crammed with a dozen other hopefuls, all of them prettier and hungrier than you expected, all of them sharing one bathroom, one telephone, and one deeply held delusion that they are the exception. That telephone becomes your entire religion. You will sit near it for hours, willing it to ring, guarding it from the other tenants like a dog guarding a bone, praying that somewhere across town a casting director is thinking specifically of you. Spoiler, he is not. He does not know you exist, and he has 40 more of you waiting outside his door. So you learn the geography of desperation. You learn which drugstore lunch counter the scouts supposedly frequent, so you can nurse a single 5-cent coffee for 3 hours and try to look discovered. You learn the walk to central casting, where extras are herded like very glamorous cattle, and paid a few dollars to stand in the background of somebody else's dream. If you are chosen, you spend 14 hours being told where to stand and never once being looked at. If you're not chosen, you walk home and do it again tomorrow. It is roughly the modern experience of refreshing your inbox for a job that has already been given to someone else, except the inbox is a sidewalk and your feet hurt. The talent scout letter, meanwhile, turns out to be the local specialty. This town runs on a steady supply of men who promise to make you a star in exchange for a small fee, a photography session, an acting class, or something worse that they phrase very carefully. The genuine studios do not charge you to be discovered. Anyone who does is selling you the one thing Hollywood has in truly infinite quantities: false hope, now with a payment plan. You will meet several of these gentlemen. You will learn to recognize the smile, and yet you stay because the fantasy is stronger than the arithmetic. Somewhere out there, a handful of people who once stood exactly where you are standing now have marble bathrooms and their faces on buses. You've seen them on the silver screen, luminous and untouchable, and you cannot quite believe that they eat and sleep and worry like anyone else. What nobody tells you, what nobody has the heart to say, is that becoming one of them will cost you almost everything you brought in that cardboard suitcase, starting with the very name your mother gave you. But first, if you are impossibly lucky, someone hands you a contract. And that, believe it or not, is where the real trouble begins. Let's talk about the contract, because if you are lucky enough to be offered one, it will feel like winning the lottery right up until the moment you actually read it. A studio contract in the golden age is not really a job offer. It is closer to an adoption paper, if the adopting parents could also sell you to a different family whenever they got bored. 7 years, they say, with a warm handshake and a heavy fountain pen. What they gently leave out is that the 7 years only count the weeks they actually feel like using you, and that they can drop you every 6 months if they change their minds. You sign it anyway, of course, because the only alternative is the long bus ride home to explain to everyone why you gave up. Here is the beautiful trick of it. The contract binds you completely, but it barely binds them at all. Every 6 months there is a little door called an option, and only the studio holds the key. If they like you, they walk through it and keep you for another stretch. If they do not, the door simply closes and you're out on the boulevard again. You meanwhile cannot leave. You cannot shop yourself around town. You cannot take a better offer. You cannot so much as sneeze at a rival studio without permission. It is a one-way loyalty, the kind of arrangement you would warn a friend about if they described the exact same thing happening in a relationship. And then there is the suspension, which is the studio's favourite weapon and your personal nightmare. Suppose they hand you a script so bad it insults the paper it is printed on, and you politely decline. They do not simply move on. They suspend you without pay, and here is the cruel part. They add all that suspended time onto the end of your contract. Refuse enough terrible films and you can be bound to them for years past your original 7. It is like being punished for saying no by having your sentence extended, which is a system usually reserved for prisons, not for the most glamorous industry on earth. You quickly learn that the word no is a luxury you cannot afford. There are only a handful of great studios running this game, a tidy little club of giants who have quietly agreed not to poach each other's talent. So there is nowhere to run, and no bidding war to save you. Your salary was set when you were a nobody, and a nobody is what it stays priced at, even after your face fills every cinema in the country. You could be the toast of the nation on screen, and still be earning roughly what a well-tipped waiter takes home, minus everything they deduct. The whole arrangement will not be seriously challenged for years yet, until one very stubborn star eventually drags a studio into court and wins, cracking the system open for everyone who comes after. But that is a battle for the future, fought by someone braver and more tired than you are today. For now, you're 22 years old, holding a fountain pen over a document you do not fully understand, with a room full of smiling executives watching you the way a cat watches a slow bird. So you sign your name, your real name, one of the last times you'll ever get to use it. Because the moment the ink dries, they're going to take that away too. It's time to meet the new you, and the new you has a different name. Somewhere in a smoky office, a group of executives has decided that whatever your mother called you simply will not fit on a marquee. Too ethnic, too plain, too long, too honest. So they hand you a name they invented over lunch, one that tests well and sounds vaguely aristocratic, and just like that, the person you spent your whole life being is retired without ceremony. You will answer to this new name for so long that eventually you forget to flinch. It's a strange thing, losing your name to a committee, a little like being handed a costume you're never allowed to take off. The logic, such as it is, goes like this. A name is a product label, and a product label must sell. It must be short enough to fit on a poster, punchy enough to remember, and smooth enough that a farmer in Ohio and a shop girl in London can both pronounce it without effort. Your real name, with its awkward consonants and its inconvenient heritage and its stubborn ordinariness, does none of that. So it goes in the bin, along with any sentimental attachment you might have had to being a specific human being from a specific family. The examples are everywhere, once you know to look. A strapping young man named after a Scottish surname and a family middle name becomes a rugged single syllable that sounds like a punch. A suave Englishman with a perfectly good birth name is reassembled into something breezier and more transatlantic. A girl with a plain surname is given a shimmering new one and sent out to conquer. None of them chose these names. A team chose for them, the way you might choose a name for a racehorse or a brand of cigarettes, weighing each syllable for maximum charm and minimum friction. And it does not stop at the name. Since they are already inventing you, they might as well finish the job. Your age is adjusted, usually downward, because youth sells and honesty does not. Your birthplace is relocated to somewhere more charming. Your background is smoothed and simplified until it fits neatly on an index card. If your real story has anything difficult in it, anything the public might find unsavory, it is quietly deleted from the official record. You arrive in Hollywood as a whole complicated person, and you leave the naming office as a tidy little myth with better teeth on the way. The disorienting part is how fast the new name sticks. At first it feels like a coat that belongs to someone else, and you keep waiting for the real owner to ask for it back. Then the makeup artists use it, and the wardrobe department uses it, and the fan magazines print it, and strangers on the street begin to shriek it at you. Give it a year or two, and you will introduce yourself to a stranger with the invented name without a flicker of hesitation, and you will have to pause and genuinely think to recall the one you were born with. That is not an accident. A person can quit. A brand belongs to the company. So you shake hands with your new self, a self assembled by men who will never know your mother, and you practice signing an autograph in handwriting that spells out a stranger. It feels like a small price to pay for stardom, and in a sense it is, because they are only getting started. They have your name now. Next, they would like a look at your face. Now that they own your name, they would like to make a few adjustments to your face, and your teeth, and your hairline, and possibly your entire body if the budget allows. The studio has a very specific idea of what a star looks like, and you, in your natural state, are merely raw material. Caps go over your teeth. Electrolysis reshapes your hairline one agonizing follicle at a time. And a helpful memo suggests you might photograph better, a few inches smaller in the waist. It's like being sent to a body shop, except the car is you and nobody asks for your opinion. By the time they finish, you will look magnificent, mysterious, and almost nothing like the person who got off the bus. Start with the teeth, because Hollywood certainly does. Your natural smile, the one that served you perfectly well for 2 decades, is deemed too crooked, too small, too yellow, too real. So they cap them, cementing a row of gleaming false fronts over your own, giving you the kind of blinding grin that does not occur anywhere in nature. It feels enormous in your mouth for weeks, like you're perpetually about to give a speech you have not prepared. But the camera loves it, and the camera, as you're learning, outranks you in every conversation. Then comes the hairline, and this is where things get medieval. If the studio decides your forehead is the wrong shape, they do not simply hand you a different hat. They send you for electrolysis, plucking and burning the hairline back hair by hair, session after painful session, to raise your brow into a more pleasing arch. There is a real and famous case of a talented young dancer whose entire look was overhauled this way. Her hairline lifted and her hair colour changed, transforming her from one ethnicity's rising talent into a whole new marketable creation. The pain was real, the recovery was slow, and the result sold millions of tickets. Progress. The nose is next on the renovation list. If the surgeons of the era are feeling ambitious, then the eyebrows, plucked into submission, then the body itself, which is handed over to trainers and, more ominously, to the studio doctor, with instructions to become smaller and stay that way. A memo may arrive noting with corporate politeness that you have gained a few pounds and that the front office is concerned. There is no gentle way to receive a memo about your own body from a committee, and yet somehow you receive several. The strangest part of all this is that it happens to the men too. We tend to imagine it was only the actresses being carved and corseted into shape, but the leading men also got the teeth, the wigs, the girdles, the hairlines, and the very firm suggestions about their waistlines. The rugged tough guy on screen might be wearing a hairpiece, standing on a hidden box, and holding in his stomach for the entire scene. The whole town was a masterpiece of illusion, and the illusion started with the human beings. By the time the renovation is complete, you look in the mirror and meet a beautiful stranger. The teeth are not yours, the hairline is engineered, the eyebrows are drawn, and the body is a work in progress enforced by contract. You have become, quite literally, a manufactured product, assembled to a specification you never got to read. And the manufacturing does not stop at the surface, because a star must not only look impossibly thin, a star must stay that way, and the studio has some very firm ideas about breakfast. It's morning, which means it's time for the most important meal of the day, which in your case is a cigarette and a cup of black coffee, so strong it could develop its own film. The camera adds 10 pounds, they keep telling you, as if the camera is the one making you eat air. The studio has weight targets, and the studio checks, so you learn to treat hunger like a difficult co-worker, always present, never acknowledged. A grapefruit is a feast, a piece of toast is a scandal. Somewhere a nutritionist is weeping, but the nutritionist does not have a screen test on Thursday, and you do. The tyranny begins at the weigh-in. Yes, there are weigh-ins, conducted with all the warmth of a livestock auction. A number is written down. The number is compared to the number the studio has decided you should be. And if the two do not match, a memo follows. There is nothing quite like being a grown adult, adored by strangers across the country, and being scolded by a corporation for the contents of your own stomach. You begin to fear the scale the way you once feared the school principal, except the principal never threatened your livelihood over a slice of bread. So you build a diet out of denial and stubbornness. Black coffee for the appetite it kills. Grapefruit because someone somewhere decided it was virtuous. Cigarettes, always cigarettes, which the tobacco companies of the era are cheerfully advertising as a slimming aid, encouraging women to reach for a smoke instead of a sweet. It is genuinely marketed this way, out loud, in the magazines. The idea that you might trade a lung for a waistline is not a secret shame. It is a selling point. You inhale your breakfast and feel productive about it. The truly grim part is that this is not framed as suffering. It is framed as discipline, as professionalism, as the price of glamour, and you are expected to be grateful for the privilege of starving beautifully. The studios keep their leading ladies in a state of permanent gentle hunger and call it dedication. Some of the brightest stars of the era lived for years on a fraction of what a body actually needs, running on nerves, nicotine, and the terror of that memo. On screen, they glide through ballrooms looking effortless. Off-screen, they're counting grapefruit segments and dreaming about a sandwich they will not allow themselves to eat. And the hunger has a way of leaking into everything. It makes you irritable, then exhausted, then strangely foggy. And just when you think you cannot possibly keep this up, the studio has a helpful solution waiting. Because staying thin is only half the battle. The other half is staying awake and energetic through 16-hour days on almost no food, and no human being can actually do that on willpower alone. Willpower has limits. The studio, however, does not much care for limits, and it happens to know a doctor. So the pattern sets itself. Eat almost nothing, smoke to smother the hunger, and dread the scale. You will keep this up not for a season but for years, decades even, your relationship with food quietly warped into something the modern world would recognize as a serious problem and treat with genuine concern. Back then, it was simply Tuesday. It was the job. It was what beauty cost, paid in installments of skipped meals and shaking hands. And when the shaking hands and the empty stomach finally caught up with you, there was always a little bottle to smooth things over. If starving yourself awake sounds difficult, do not worry, because the studio has a solution, and it comes in a small bottle. There is a pill to make you thin, a pill to make you peppy, and a pill to bring you gently back down when the peppy pill will not let you sleep. The studio doctor hands them out like a kindly uncle distributing candy, and nobody thinks to ask what happens when you take them every single day for years. You just know that the pep pills make the 16-hour days survivable, and the other pills make the silence bearable. It's a wonderful little cycle, the kind of thing that feels like help right up until it very much is not. The pep pill is the star of this particular horror show. It is an amphetamine, though nobody calls it that to your face, and it does exactly what you would expect. It scrubs away the exhaustion, silences the hunger, and floods you with a bright artificial energy that lets you dance through take after take under those cooking lights without collapsing. It feels, for a while, like a miracle. You're thin, you're tireless, you're luminous. What nobody mentions is that the miracle has a bill attached, and the bill compounds daily. Because of course the pep pill works too well. It leaves you wired long past midnight, heart racing, mind sprinting, utterly unable to sleep in the few hours the studio has grudgingly allowed for rest. And so a second bottle appears, this one full of barbiturates, sedatives strong enough to switch you off like a lamp. Down you go into a chemical sleep, only to be jolted awake before dawn, and reach for the first bottle again to face another day. Up with one pill, down with the other, up, down, a metronome of medication keeping a human being running at a pace no human being was built to sustain. The cruelest detail is who is handing these out. It is not a shady dealer in an alley. It is the studio's own doctor, a respectable man with a respectable office, prescribing this cycle to teenagers and young adults because it keeps the production on schedule and the leading lady camera ready. Some of the most beloved performers of the age were placed on this regimen while barely out of childhood, their bodies and brains still forming, handed uppers and downers by the very grown-ups who were supposed to protect them. It was not framed as addiction. It was framed as taking care of you. And the trouble with a chemical metronome is that it never really stops on its own. The doses creep up as the body adjusts, requiring more of each pill to reach the same effect. The natural ability to sleep, to wake, to feel hungry, to feel calm, quietly erodes until the pills are no longer smoothing over life but replacing the machinery of life entirely. Careers, and in the most heartbreaking cases lives, were shortened by this exact spiral. The dream factory ran on it, and it worked, right up until it destroyed the very people it was meant to be building. So you take the little pill in the morning because you cannot face the day without it, and the little pill at night because you cannot escape the day without it, and you tell yourself, as everyone tells themselves, that you have it under control. Maybe you even do for a while. But the studio does not measure you in years of health. It measures you in pictures completed on schedule, and by that measure the pills are a triumph. Now, freshly medicated and running on borrowed energy, you're finally ready for your education, because the studio has decided you do not yet know how to walk. Congratulations, you're now enrolled in Star School, which is exactly like regular school except everything you already knew how to do is apparently wrong. You're taught to speak in an accent that belongs to no actual place on Earth, a smooth mid-Atlantic purr designed to sound expensive. You're taught to dance, to fence, to ride, to laugh, and yes, to walk, because your ordinary walk simply will not do. Coaches circle you like sculptors, correcting your vowels, your posture, and the tragic way you hold a teacup. It is humbling to be 22 years old and taking remedial lessons in how to be a human being, but the studio insists, and the studio is always insisting. Begin with the voice, because that is what the dialect coach begins with, usually by informing you that the way you have spoken your entire life is a catastrophe. If you carry a regional twang, it must go. If you carry a foreign accent, it must be sanded down or occasionally exaggerated into something more marketable. What they want is that curious transatlantic tone, the one that sounds like it was raised half in London and half in a very expensive American drawing room belonging to no real geography at all. You practice your vowels for hours until you can no longer hear what a normal person sounds like. You are in essence being taught to talk like a butler in a play about rich people. Then the physical curriculum begins, and it is relentless. There is dance class, whether or not you will ever dance on screen, because the studio wants you graceful. There is fencing, because a leading man may one day need to cross swords convincingly, and a clumsy duel is an embarrassment to everyone. There is horseback riding, because westerns pay the bills, and a star who bounces around in the saddle like a sack of turnips will not do. There is singing, there is diction, there is deportment, that grand old word for learning to enter a room as though you own it and everyone in it. And yes, there is a class in how to walk. This is the one that truly breaks the spirit. You have been walking successfully since you were roughly 1 year old, and now a woman with a clipboard is explaining patiently that you have been doing it wrong the whole time. Shoulders back, chin level, glide from the hips, do not stomp, do not shuffle, do not swing your arms like a man late for a train. You will practice crossing a room with a book balanced on your head, until walking feels less like a reflex and more like a difficult foreign language you're only pretending to speak. The purpose of all this is not really to make you talented. It is to make you interchangeable in the best possible way, a smooth, polished object that can be dropped into a period drama, a musical, a comedy, or a swashbuckler without embarrassing the studio. They are not nurturing your unique gift. They are filing off your rough edges until you fit the mould, the same mould they use for everyone, so that any star can be plugged into any picture like a spare part. It is remarkably efficient and just a little bit soul-crushing. Still, you learn. You learn to speak like landed gentry, to waltz, to fence, to sit a horse, and to walk across a room as though gravity is a personal friend. You've been thoroughly rebuilt from the accent down, and now that the studio has invented your name, renovated your face, controlled your diet, medicated your energy, and corrected your walk, there is only one question left that actually matters. It is the question the entire town orbits around, and it is answered not by you, not by your coaches, but by a machine in a dark room. It is time for your screen test. Today you find out whether the camera loves you, and the camera unfortunately has no manners about it. A screen test is a strange ritual where you stand under blistering lights, say a few lines to a bored technician, and turn slowly so that every angle of your renovated face can be judged in silence. Somewhere a group of men will later watch this footage and decide your entire future while eating sandwiches. The camera is honest in a way no person ever is. It sees whatever indefinable thing makes a face into a star, and it either finds it in you or it does not. There is no arguing with it, and there is certainly no second sandwich for you. The setup alone is designed to unnerve you. The lights are enormous and close, throwing off a heat that makes the fresh makeup on your face begin its slow slide toward your collar. Beyond the glare, you can barely make out the crew, a handful of professionals who have seen 1,000 hopefuls do exactly this, and who react to you with all the emotion of furniture. Someone reads you a scene flatly, giving you nothing to work with, and you are expected to bring it to life anyway. You've been rehearsing this moment for months. The room treats it like the fourth appointment before lunch. Then comes the turn. You're asked to rotate slowly in place so the lens can inspect your profile, your three-quarter angle, the back of your carefully engineered hairline. It is the least glamorous thing imaginable, being spun around like a chicken on a spit so that strangers can evaluate whether your left cheekbone photographs as well as your right. Every flaw you have spent months trying to fix feels suddenly enormous under that light. You smile because they told you to smile, and the smile feels like it is being held up with wires. The whole thing lasts a few minutes and then it is over, and the not knowing begins. Your test is spliced onto a reel with a dozen other hopefuls and carried into a private screening room, where the men who actually run things settle into plush chairs to watch. They are looking for that one impossible quality, the thing they cannot name and cannot manufacture, the reason a camera adores one perfectly lovely face and remains completely indifferent to another equally lovely one right beside it. Talent helps, beauty helps, but neither is the deciding factor, and everyone in that room knows it, even if none of them can put it into words. Because that is the maddening secret of the screen test. The camera has its own taste, and its taste does not always agree with the human eye. There are people who stop conversation when they walk into a room and vanish completely on film, all their magnetism somehow leaking out between the lens and the projector. And there are ordinary-looking people you would pass on the street without a glance, who step in front of the camera and suddenly glow like something lit from within. Nobody can predict it reliably. The studio spent fortunes trying, and in the end they simply had to point the camera at you and see what it thought. So you go home and you wait, and the waiting is its own special torture, because there is nothing left to control. You did the diet, the coaching, the renovation, the pills, all of it, and now your fate rests entirely on a strip of film being watched by men with sandwiches. If the camera loved you, a whole new life swings open. If it did not, the boarding house and the bus are waiting. And if it did love you, if you passed, then congratulations. You've earned the right to disappear into the machine completely. Welcome to daily life on the lot. The studio lot is its own little kingdom, a walled city where entire worlds are built and torn down before lunch. You report before sunrise and leave whenever they say you can, which is a concept with no fixed relationship to the clock. There is a commissary where you eat beside cowboys, Roman senators, and a talking dog, all on their break. There are sound stages the size of cathedrals, and a publicity office quietly deciding who you are dating this month. It's a company town in the most literal sense, and you are the product, freshly manufactured and always on call. Somewhere out there is a normal life with weekends in it, but you signed that away in paragraph 4. Step through the gate, and the ordinary world simply stops existing. Inside is a self-contained universe with its own streets, its own police, its own fire brigade, its own schools for the child actors, and its own hospital for when the pace inevitably catches up with someone. A single lot can build a New York street, a medieval castle, a jungle, and an ocean, all within walking distance of each other, all fake, all convincing enough to fool millions. You could spend your entire working life inside these walls and rarely see the real sky, and many people did exactly that. The commissary is where the surrealism peaks. You sit down for your small sad lunch and glance around to find a Roman centurion arguing about baseball, a gorilla removing its own head to eat a sandwich, and a chorus line of dancers resting their aching feet beside a man dressed as a 19th century admiral. Everyone is in costume, everyone is exhausted, and everyone is on a schedule so tight that lunch is less a meal than a pit stop. It is the strangest cafeteria on earth, and after a few weeks you stop noticing, which is somehow the strangest part of all. Your day has no natural end. You're called in before dawn for hair and makeup, which alone can eat 2 or 3 hours before you've done a single useful thing. Then you wait, because filmmaking is mostly waiting, punctuated by brief bursts of intense activity when the lights are finally set and the director is finally ready. A 12-hour day is a short one. 16 is common. The work week runs 6 days, and the 6th day frequently bleeds deep into the night, so that Saturday and Sunday blur into a single desperate scramble to sleep before it all begins again. Those little pills, you will recall, exist precisely to make this humanly possible, and you are never truly off duty, because you are never truly your own. When you're not filming, the studio can still summon you for publicity shoots, for fittings, for interviews it has scripted, for those arranged public appearances that keep your invented image polished. Your time does not belong to you. Your schedule is assembled by people who have never asked whether you are tired, because tiredness is not their department. Their department is output, measured in completed pictures, and you are simply the machinery that produces it. It is a golden cage, and the emphasis lands firmly on cage. Yes, you are fed, coached, dressed, and photographed like royalty. Yes, there is a strange camaraderie among the inmates, a gallows humour shared by people who all understand that their lives are not their own. But the gate that keeps the crowds out also keeps you in, and the same walls that build your fame quietly build your prison. You're cared for the way a valuable racehorse is cared for, which is to say meticulously and entirely for someone else's benefit. And should you ever forget your place, should you ever mistake yourself for a free person, there is a clause in that contract designed specifically to remind you. It concerns your morals, and it is not really about morals at all. Buried in that contract you barely read is a small, polite paragraph called the morality clause, and it is neither small nor polite in practice. It says that if you ever behave in a way that embarrasses the studio, they can drop you like a hot lamp. The trouble is that the studio gets to decide what counts as embarrassing, and their standards shift with the wind and the headlines. Get photographed at the wrong party, love the wrong person, say the wrong thing to the wrong reporter, and suddenly your career develops a mysterious illness. You're not just an actor, you're a walking advertisement for the studio's good name, and advertisements, as everyone knows, are not allowed to have private lives. The clause was born from panic, as most such things are. Early Hollywood had suffered a run of genuinely lurid scandals, the kind that filled newspapers and rattled the church-going public, and the studios grew terrified that public disgust might one day turn into public boycott. So they wrote themselves an escape hatch, a single paragraph that let them sever ties with any star who became a liability, no matter how much money that star was making, no matter how many pictures were half filmed. Morality, in this context, was never about right and wrong. It was about protecting the brand. And because the studio defines the terms are whatever the studio needs them to be on any given morning. There is no fixed list of forbidden behaviours handed to you when you sign. There is only a vague, all-encompassing promise that you will not do anything they consider unbecoming, which conveniently means they can point at almost anything and call it a breach. Fall in love with someone the front office disapproves of, and you have breached it. Speak your honest political mind and you have breached it. Simply becoming convenient at the wrong moment and a reason will be located. The rules are written in disappearing ink, visible only when it suits them. So you learn to live under permanent surveillance, most of it self-imposed. You watch what you say to reporters, because reporters are not your friends and a single careless sentence can be dressed up as a scandal. You watch where you're seen and with whom, because a photograph can be arranged to mean anything. You bury the truest parts of yourself, the loves and beliefs and habits that make you a person, because any one of them might be judged unbecoming by a committee that has never met you. It is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the 16-hour days. It is the exhaustion of never ever being allowed to be off guard. The genuinely insidious thing is how it reaches past your working hours and into the private chambers of your life. A factory worker who behaves scandalously on a Saturday night still has a job on Monday. You do not. Your Saturday night is company business. Your relationships are company business. The person you choose to love, the drink you choose to have, the opinion you choose to hold in the privacy of your own home, all of it is subject to review by men who see you as a line item. You have signed away not just your labour but your conscience, and rented out your reputation to a landlord who can evict you on a whim. This is the true price of the golden cage, the one nobody quotes when they describe the glamour. Not the hunger, not the pills, not the invented name, but the slow surrender of the right to be a full human being in public. And here is the final twist, the one that makes the whole thing complete. Since you are now forbidden from having a genuine, spontaneous, embarrassing private life of your own, the studio does not simply leave that space empty. It fills it. It writes you a new one, a spotless invented life fit for the fan magazines, and it employs an entire department to make sure the whole country believes it. Which brings us, inevitably, to publicity. You may think you know who you are, but the publicity department would like a word. To them, the real you is a rough draft badly in need of editing. They give you a hometown more charming than your actual one, hobbies you have never attempted, and a childhood story so heartwarming it could sell soap. They decide whether you're the wholesome sweetheart, the brooding rebel, or the sophisticated mystery, and then they make certain you never ever break character. Interviews are scripted, questions are pre-approved, and your genuine opinions are considered a liability. It is a peculiar kind of fame, being adored by millions of people for a personality that a marketing team assembled out of spare parts. The process begins with a biography, and the biography is fiction. A publicist sits down with the raw material of your life, discards anything dull or difficult, and builds a more marketable version from the wreckage. Your unremarkable town becomes a picturesque farm where you milked cows at dawn and dreamed of the stars. Your ordinary parents become salt of the earth heroes. Any inconvenient facts, a previous marriage, a rough patch, a background the public might not warm to, are quietly filed away where no reporter will ever find them. By the time they finish, your life story reads like something written to make audiences sigh, which is precisely what it was written to do. Then they assign you a type, because types sell tickets and complexity confuses. You're handed a personality the way you were handed a name, off the shelf. based on what the front office thinks the public is hungry for this season. Perhaps you are the girl next door, sweet and unthreatening, the kind a mother would approve of. Perhaps you are the smouldering troublemaker, all danger and cheekbones. Perhaps you are the elegant enigma who never quite explains herself. Whatever they choose, you will now perform it every waking moment you are visible to the public, on set and off, until the mask fuses to your face. The interviews naturally are theatre. A magazine writer arrives to capture the real you, and what they get is a carefully staged performance, with a studio chaperone sitting in the corner making sure nobody goes off script. The questions have been approved in advance. Your answers have often been drafted for you. You're photographed in a kitchen you have never cooked in, holding a pet you've never met, wearing an apron that has never touched flour, radiating a domestic contentment that exists only in the photograph. The reader devours it as intimate truth. It is about as intimate as a billboard. And here is the trap. The invented personality does not stay conveniently at work. It follows you home, because you are never off duty, and slowly it begins to crowd out the actual person underneath. When strangers only ever cheer for the fiction, when every reward you receive is addressed to the mask, the temptation to simply become the mask grows overwhelming. Some stars lost track of where the invention ended and they began, spending decades defending a version of themselves that a stranger drafted over a lunch meeting. It is a strange loneliness, being loved passionately by millions of people, none of whom have the faintest idea who you really are. So you smile the assigned smile and recite the assigned story and protect the assigned image, day after day, year after year. You have become a character in your own life, played by yourself, directed by strangers. And a character this valuable cannot be left to wander into the wrong situations. That is why the studio does not merely invent who you are, it also invents who you love, and it schedules that too. Tonight you have a date and you did not choose it, meet it beforehand, or have any say in the matter whatsoever. The studio has decided that you and another one of its stars would make a delightful couple in the newspapers, so off you go, arm in arm, to be photographed gazing at each other with manufactured tenderness. It does not matter that you have nothing in common, or that one of you would rather be almost anywhere else. The romance exists purely for the cameras, a little theatrical performance to sell tickets and fill gossip columns. You smile, you pose, you murmur sweet nothings for the flashbulbs, and then you both go home separately, exhausted from being in love with someone you cannot stand. The logic is pure arithmetic. Two rising stars photographed together generate roughly 4 times the newspaper coverage of either one alone, and coverage is oxygen. So the publicity department plays matchmaker with the cold precision of a chess player, pairing off its assets to maximize attention regardless of whether the two humans involved have ever exchanged a genuine word. You're not people to them in these moments. You're a promotional event with legs. The date itself is an elaborate piece of stagecraft. You're told where to go, a restaurant or premiere where the photographers have been conveniently tipped off in advance, because a candid romantic moment works best when the candidness has been scheduled to the minute. You arrive, you perform affection for the cameras, you let them capture the tender glance and the shared laugh, and then the moment the flashbulbs stop, the performance evaporates. The tenderness had a shelf life of about 90 seconds. You may spend the rest of the evening sitting in polite silence with a near stranger, both of you counting down until you can decently go home. The magazines, of course, run wild with it. A single stage dinner becomes a whispered engagement, a budding romance, a love that has the whole nation swooning. Readers write letters, fan clubs take sides. 2 people who can barely tolerate each other are crowned the great couple of the year, and the studio quietly counts the box office receipts. When the fake romance has served its purpose and squeezed out every last drop of coverage, it is quietly ended, sometimes with a tragic breakup story that generates yet another wave of headlines. Even the ending is monetized. There is a darker layer beneath the silliness, though, and it is worth naming plainly. For some stars, these arrangements were not merely inconvenient, but a genuine necessity, because their real hearts belonged to someone the era would never permit them to be seen with. A staged public romance could function as camouflage, a shield against a public and a studio that punished the truth ruthlessly. What looks from a distance like harmless promotional theatre was, for certain people, a survival strategy in a world that gave them no safe way to simply be themselves. So you play your part, you smile for the cameras, and you go home alone to whatever real life you are permitted to have. The romance the whole country believes in is a business transaction with better lighting, and if a manufactured love affair sounds like an elaborate lie to maintain, consider that maintaining it required an entire ecosystem of enforcers, gossip merchants and image police, all working around the clock to keep the fiction airtight. At the very top of that ecosystem sat two women with poison pens, and even the studio bosses were afraid of them. There are two women in this town more powerful than most studio bosses, and they have never directed a film in their lives. They are the gossip columnists, and their weapons are ink and rumour. A single approving line from one of them can launch you, and a single sour one can quietly bury you before lunch. So you flatter them, you feed them harmless secrets, and you live in low-grade terror of ever landing on their bad side. They know everything, or claim to, and the difference hardly matters when millions of readers believe every word. Being a star means smiling warmly at the two people who could end you, and meaning it right down to your capped teeth. Their power came from reach. Their columns ran in hundreds of newspapers and were read by tens of millions of people every single day. An audience so vast that what these two women decided to print effectively became the truth for most of the country. There was no fact-checking to speak of, no right of reply that mattered, no correction that could ever catch up to the original poison. If one of them declared you difficult, or washed up, or involved in something unsavoury, that declaration travelled coast to coast overnight, and no denial you issued would ever travel half as far. So the entire industry bowed to them, and bowed low. Stars invited them to dinner and hung on their every word. Studios granted them exclusive scoops to keep them sweet, feeding them planted stories in exchange for gentle treatment of their own talent. The columnists were courted like visiting royalty, seated at the best tables, flattered relentlessly, and privately loathed by nearly everyone who had to do it. They understood exactly what they were, and they enjoyed it. Power that everyone must pander to is a very pleasant thing to hold, especially when you never have to earn it twice. The rivalry between the two of them made everything worse, because it turned you into ammunition. Give a juicy exclusive to one, and you had mortally offended the other, and now you had made a lifelong enemy through the simple act of answering a telephone. Stars found themselves trapped between two feuding titans, forced to ration their secrets with the delicacy of a diplomat diffusing a border war. Choose wrong, and you might find your carefully invented image punctured in print, your studio unwilling to defend you, your fans suddenly reading that you were not the sweetheart they had been told to love, and they wielded genuine ruin, not just embarrassment. A columnist with a grudge could hint at the very things the morality clause forbade, could suggest scandals, real or invented, could question your politics in an era when the wrong politics ended careers outright. They could not fire you themselves, but they could make you so toxic that the studio did the firing for them, then thank the columnist for the warning. It was destruction by proxy, deniable and devastating, and everyone in town knew it. So you play the game, you laugh at their jokes, you compliment their dreadful hats, you hand over a small harmless secret now and then to keep the machine fed and pointed away from you. You treat two newspaper women with the wary respect you would give a sleeping predator, because in this town they are exactly that. And the strangest part is that the columnists were only the loudest voice in a far larger chorus. An entire industry of magazines, photographers and reporters whose sole purpose was to package your invented life and sell it back to the public by the millions. To understand the whole machine, you have to look at what fed it. Every month, glossy magazines hit the newsstands, promising readers the intimate secret truth about their favourite stars, and almost none of it is true. Behind the dreamy photographs and confessional headlines sits a whole industry devoted to manufacturing your private life for public consumption. The studio feeds the magazines carefully invented stories. The magazines dress them up as scoops, and the fans devour them whole. You appear to be candidly baking cookies in your kitchen. In reality, you have never seen this kitchen before, and the cookies are props. It's a beautiful, humming machine of polite lies, and you are simultaneously its biggest product and its least consulted employee. The relationship between the studios and the magazines was a cozy little conspiracy dressed up as journalism. The magazines needed a constant supply of star material to fill their pages and sell their copies. The studios had a constant need to keep their invented images glowing in the public eye. So the two sides struck a comfortable bargain. The studio would hand over access, photographs, and pre-approved stories, and in exchange the magazine would print nothing the studio did not want printed. It was advertising disguised as reporting, and everyone in on it was making money. The photo shoots that produced all those candid glimpses were staged down to the last teaspoon. A star relaxing at home was photographed in a set dressed to look like a home, often not their own, arranged by professionals to project exactly the right mood of wholesome domestic bliss. You would be posed lovingly tending a garden you had never dug, reading a book you had never opened, gazing adoringly at a spouse the studio had assigned you 3 weeks earlier. The readers received these images as stolen private moments. They were about as stolen and private as a soup can label. The stories were built with the same care and the same fiction. A star recovering from heartbreak, a star preparing for a dream wedding, a star bravely overcoming some tidy, sympathetic little hardship, all of it shaped by publicists to reinforce the assigned personality and drive people into cinemas. If the truth was interesting and flattering, they used the truth. If the truth was dull, difficult, or off-brand, they simply improved upon it. The line between what happened and what sold was erased so thoroughly that even the stars sometimes struggled to remember which version was real. For the readers, though, the magazines were a genuine lifeline to a glittering world they would never otherwise touch, and that is what gave the machine its terrible power. Ordinary people scraping through hard times could spend a few coins and disappear for an afternoon into a fantasy of glamour, romance, and beautiful people leading beautiful lives. They believed it because they needed to believe it, and their belief was the fuel that kept the whole apparatus running. Nobody wanted the curtain pulled back. The illusion was the product, and the product was beloved. And you, the star at the centre of it all, had the least say of anyone in how you were portrayed. Your triumphs, your sorrows, your loves, your home, your very personality were written and rewritten by strangers and sold by the millions, and you were expected to smile and cooperate and never, ever contradict the official version. You were the most visible person in the country and one of the least free. Keeping a machine this large and this dishonest running smoothly required more than pretty photographs, however. Sometimes the truth got messy, dangerously messy, and when it did, the studio sent a very particular kind of man to make the mess disappear. Every studio has a man you hope you never need, the fixer, whose job is to make inconvenient realities quietly vanish. Crashed your car after too many of those little pills? He's already there. Said something regrettable that a witness overheard. He has already spoken to the witness. He carries cash, favours, and an unsettling calm, and he can turn a career-ending catastrophe into a story that never happened. The police know him, the reporters know him, and the morgue allegedly knows him too. He's proof that in this town, the truth is not discovered so much as negotiated, and that the studio would much rather pay to erase a problem than let one of its investments look human in public. His true talent is speed. Trouble in Hollywood is a race against the morning papers, and the fixer runs it professionally. Before the wreckage has even stopped smoking, before the shocked bystanders have finished dialing, he is on the scene with a reassuring manner and a briefcase, rearranging the facts into something the public can safely be shown. A drunken star behind the wheel becomes a sober star who swerved to avoid a dog. A brawl becomes a misunderstanding. He does not wait for the scandal to break. He gets there first and makes sure it never breaks at all. His methods are a quiet mixture of charm, cash, and the gentle suggestion of consequences. A witness with a loose tongue is persuaded financially to develop a poor memory. A photographer with an incriminating negative finds that negative purchased, or occasionally simply gone. A police report is softened by an officer who understands that friendly relations with a powerful studio are worth more than one accurate paragraph. It is astonishing how much reality can be reshaped when a well-funded organization decides it must be, and the fixer is the artist who does the reshaping. The darkest whispers around these men concern the cases where the trouble could not simply be hushed, where something truly terrible had happened and the studio's priority remained, coldly, the protection of the brand. In those situations, the fixer's job was not to help the people involved, but to manage the narrative, to control what the public would be permitted to know, to ensure that a valuable star emerged with an unblemished image no matter what had actually occurred. Whether every legend about them is true hardly matters. What matters is that the town believed they could make almost anything disappear, and that belief was itself a kind of power. Consider what this tells you about your actual worth to the studio. They will invent your personality, arrange your loves, and polish your image, and when you finally slip and do something genuinely human and genuinely messy, they will not comfort you or help you face it honestly. They will dispatch a man to bury it, not for your sake but for theirs, so that the asset keeps performing and the money keeps flowing. Their care for you begins and ends at the box office. You are a valuable machine that has developed a fault, and the fixer is maintenance. So you go through your gilded days knowing that a safety net exists, and knowing at the same time that the net was never woven to catch you. It was woven to catch the studio's reputation, with you incidentally attached. It is a strange comfort, having a professional whose job is to make your worst moments vanish, and a stranger horror to understand that he would let you vanish too if that served the picture better. And yet, of all the ways this town could grind down a hopeful, the fixer and his clean-ups were not even the darkest. There was an abuse woven so deep into the machinery that everyone knew, and almost no one dared to say it out loud. Let's speak plainly about something the glamour was very good at hiding. In a town where a handful of powerful men controlled every door to success, that power was too often abused, and the people with the least leverage paid the highest price. Careers could be dangled as bait, and refusing came with a cost that everyone understood, but no one was allowed to say out loud. The polite fiction of the era simply looked the other way, and the same publicity machine that invented sweet romances was very skilled at burying anything uglier. It is the darkest thread running under all that shimmer, and it deserves to be named honestly rather than dressed up. Behind many a fairy tale rise was a person navigating an impossible situation with no good options and no one to tell. The heart of the problem was the raw imbalance of power. On one side stood the moguls, producers and executives who could grant a contract, a role, a future, or take all of it away with a phone call. On the other side stood thousands of young hopefuls with everything to gain, and no protection whatsoever. No union strong enough to shield them, no law that took their complaints seriously, no press that would print their side. When one group holds every key and the other group is desperate to get through the door, exploitation does not require a conspiracy. It only requires opportunity, and the opportunity was everywhere. The pressure was rarely stated as bluntly as legend imagines, and that was part of its cruelty. It came wrapped in the language of opportunity, a private meeting to discuss a role, a late invitation framed as a lucky break, an understanding left unspoken but perfectly clear to everyone in the room. Saying yes was implied to be simply how things worked, the price of admission that nobody would ever acknowledge charging. Saying no was understood to carry a cost, the sudden cooling of interest, the part that mysteriously went to someone else, the door that had been opened swinging quietly shut. And the silence around it was engineered, not accidental. The victims could not speak, because to speak was to be branded difficult, unstable, or worse, and to be branded any of those things was to end a career before it began. The same fixers and publicists who buried car crashes buried these stories too, and the same columnists who could destroy a reputation stood ready to destroy anyone who complained. The entire machine that manufactured all those wholesome images had a second, quieter function, which was to make absolutely certain the public never saw what the manufacturing sometimes cost. It is important to sit with this honestly, without the wink and the euphemism the era preferred. Real people, many of them very young, were placed in situations where their dreams were held hostage to the desires of powerful men, and they were then denied any safe way to name what had happened to them. The glossy magazines never ran that story. The fan clubs never heard it. The official history of the Golden Age glided right over it, all soft focus and orchestras, while the people who lived it carried the weight in private, often for the rest of their lives. So when you look back at that shimmering age and feel the pull of its glamour, hold this truth alongside it. The Dream Factory was, for some, a genuinely dangerous place, and its beauty was built in part on silences that should never have been kept. The least we can do all these years later is refuse to keep them. That refusal matters, because control in Hollywood did not stop at the private meeting. It reached all the way onto the screen itself, dictating what millions of moviegoers were even allowed to see, and the rulebook that governed it was almost comically strict. Before you film a single scene, an invisible referee has already read the script and crossed out anything remotely interesting. This is the Hays Code, a strict set of rules about what may and may not appear on screen, enforced with the enthusiasm of a very nervous chaperone. Married couples must sleep in separate beds. Crime must always be punished. A kiss may last only so long before someone somewhere clutches their pearls. Writers learn to imply everything and show nothing, becoming masters of the meaningful cut to a crackling fireplace. It is censorship dressed as decency, and it means the wickedly adult stories of the era all had to be told in a code of raised eyebrows and closing doors. The code was born, like the morality clause, out of fear of the public. Faced with scandalized church groups, threatened boycotts, and the looming danger of the government stepping in to censor films directly, the studios did what studios always do. They decided to censor themselves first, on their own terms, and wrote an elaborate rulebook that would keep the moralizers satisfied and the ticket money flowing. Self-regulation was simply cheaper and safer than letting outsiders hold the scissors, and the rules were extraordinarily specific about the human body and its inconvenient habits. A married couple, two people the audience knew shared life and a bed, had to be shown in twin beds a chaste distance apart, as though marriage were a mild friendship. A kiss was timed. Certain words were forbidden outright. Anything that might suggest what adults actually do behind closed doors was to be handled by having the doors very firmly close. The screen became a world where passion existed intensely and was never, ever allowed to be seen through to its natural conclusion. The code also insisted above all on moral bookkeeping. Crime could appear, but crime had to be punished by the final reel, so that no viewer ever left the cinema with the dangerous idea that a wrongdoer might simply get away with it. Villains had to lose, sinners had to suffer. Virtue had to be rewarded tidily and unmistakably, whether or not the story earned it. Life, of course, does not operate on this cheerful accounting system, but the movies were required to, and so decades of films end with a moral balance sheet forcibly zeroed out in the last 5 minutes. The unexpected result of all this restriction was a strange flowering of cleverness. Deprived of the ability to show anything directly, the great writers and directors of the era became geniuses of implication, learning to say the forbidden thing so slyly that it sailed over the censor's head and landed perfectly with the audience. A lingering look, a sudden cut to waves crashing on a shore, a line of dialogue with 2 meanings, one innocent and one distinctly not. The audience understood exactly what was being suggested. The censor could not object because technically nothing had been shown. Repression, it turns out, is an excellent teacher of wit. Still, make no mistake about what it was. An enormous swath of human experience, honest passion, moral ambiguity, the simple truth that bad people sometimes prosper, was ruled off limits for a generation of filmmaking, and the movies of the age carry that constraint in their bones. What looks to modern eyes like quaint innocence was often a straitjacket, worn with as much grace as its wearers could manage, and if the studio would go to such lengths to control what you did on screen, you can imagine how far it would go to control what you did off it, right down to arranging entire marriages for people who never intended to be married at all. Sometimes a fake date is not enough, and the studio decides you need a whole fake marriage. If your real private life does not fit the wholesome image they're selling, they will happily arrange a spouse for you, complete with a lovely wedding and a cosy fabricated home life for the magazines. Both parties understand the arrangement perfectly. It is less a marriage than a joint publicity venture with a shared address. You pose for the anniversary photos, you attend the premieres hand in hand, and you protect each other's secrets with the loyalty of people who have no other choice. It is a strange kind of partnership, built not on love, but on the mutual need to survive a town that punishes the truth. The reason these arrangements existed at all was the era's brutal intolerance, enforced by both the law and the morality clause. A star whose true heart could never be revealed to the public faced a terrible choice. Hide completely and live in isolating secrecy, or construct a convincing public life that gave the studio and the fans the wholesome picture they demanded. The arranged marriage was the studio's tidy solution, a way to protect its investment by wrapping an inconvenient truth inside a reassuring fiction. It was cynical, and for the people inside it, it was often the only path that kept both career and safety intact. The wedding itself would be a genuine production, staged for maximum public delight. There would be a beautiful ceremony, radiant photographs, a breathless write-up in the fan magazines about the perfect union of 2 beloved stars. Readers across the country would sigh over the fairy tale romance, send gifts, follow every anniversary. None of them would ever suspect that the whole thing had been negotiated in an office, that the vows were a marketing document, that the happy couple would return from the honeymoon to separate lives under one carefully maintained roof, and maintaining it was constant labour. The couple had to be seen together at the right functions, photographed with the right tenderness, quoted saying the right devoted things about each other in interviews. They had to keep their real lives, their real loves, hidden not only from the public but often from most of the people around them, trusting only a tiny circle. It was an exhausting, unending performance, a play with no intermission and no closing night, staged for an audience that must never learn it was watching a play at all. What sustained these arrangements, when they worked, was a genuine and rather moving loyalty between the partners. Two people trapped by the same impossible rules could become fierce protectors of each other, guarding one another's secrets, providing cover, offering the one relationship in which neither had to pretend. It was not the marriage the magazines described, but it was sometimes a real bond all the same, a friendship forged in shared danger. In a town built on lies, this particular lie occasionally sheltered something true. Still, the human cost of it should not be softened. People spent decades unable to openly love the person they actually loved, forced to smile beside a stranger for the cameras. Their real lives shrunk to whatever could be hidden. The fairy tale the public adored was, for the two people living it, a cage with excellent lighting. It is one more reminder that the glamour of the age was frequently a surface stretched tight over a great deal of quiet suffering. And speaking of suffering stretched tight beneath a glamorous surface, let us finally step onto the set itself, where the actual work of making these dreams was as physically punishing as anything else in this town. You may imagine that making movies is glamorous, and you will lose that idea somewhere around hour 12 on a stifling soundstage. The lights are enormous, blindingly bright, and hot enough to make the makeup slide right off your face, and the sweat pool in places the costume was not designed to hide. Days routinely stretch to 16 hours, and the little pep pills are the only reason your eyelids still function. Between takes you stand perfectly still, so nobody has to fix your hair again, roasting quietly under a small artificial sun. The finished film will look effortless and dreamy, and that dreaminess was purchased with a great deal of very undreamy human misery. The lights are the first thing that will try to kill you. Early film stock was slow and hungry for light, so the sound stages had to be flooded with a blazing wall of lamps to expose anything at all. These lamps threw off ferocious heat, enough to turn a closed stage into an oven, enough to blister skin on a long day, enough to make performers genuinely faint under their glare. You act your tender love scene bathed in a light so hot you can feel your carefully applied face beginning to melt, and you hold the tender expression anyway because the director has not yet called cut. Then there is the sheer, grinding length of the day. Filmmaking is not 2 hours of glamorous performance. It is hours of tedious waiting punctuated by brief, exhausting bursts of intensity, all of it stacked into workdays that would be illegal in most modern professions. You arrive in the dark for hair and makeup, you toil through the daylight you never actually see, and you finish long after the sun has gone, only to do it again after too few hours of chemically assisted sleep. The body was never meant to run like this, which is precisely why the studio doctor stays so busy. The waiting between shots is its own peculiar torment. Once you have been fully assembled, hair, makeup, costume, all of it perfect, you become terrified of moving, because moving means undoing the 2 hours of work that made you camera ready. So you sit or stand with the stiff patience of a mannequin, sweating under the lights, careful not to smudge, not to wrinkle, not to disturb a single lacquered curl, while the crew adjusts something for the 20th time. Glamour, it turns out, is largely the art of holding still and not complaining. And the show, as the saying goes, must go on, which in practice means that your discomfort is simply not relevant to the schedule. Exhaustion is not an excuse. Illness is barely an excuse. A production costs an enormous amount of money for every day it runs, and a tired or unwell star is a costly inconvenience, to be medicated, propped up, and pointed back toward the camera. You learn to perform through fatigue that would send an ordinary worker home, because the alternative is to be seen as unreliable, and unreliable is one short step from replaceable. The astonishing thing is how completely the finished film erases all of it. Audiences watch you drift through a scene looking cool, rested and luminous, with no idea that you were dizzy from the heat, running on pills and grapefruit, and holding a smile through 16 hours of accumulating agony. The effortlessness is the whole illusion, and manufacturing effortlessness is backbreaking. But the lights and the hours were only part of the physical toll. The very clothes they poured you into, the gorgeous gowns and sculpted suits that made you a vision on screen, were often instruments of quiet, elegant torture. Glamour, you're learning, is mostly an act of endurance performed in extremely uncomfortable clothing. The gowns are breathtaking and the corsets underneath them are instruments of gentle torture, cinched until breathing becomes a hobby rather than a certainty. The shoes are gorgeous and roughly the shape of a medieval punishment. You will stand, pose and dance in all of it for hours while smiling as though nothing on your body hurts, which is a lie so large it deserves its own award. Every effortless glide across a ballroom floor is a small feat of pain management. The audience sees a goddess floating by. You feel every single rib politely filing a complaint. Start beneath the gown, where the real work happens. To achieve the impossibly sculpted silhouette the era adored, the body had to be forced into it with foundation garments built more for architecture than for comfort. Corsets and girdles compressed the waist, reshaped the torso, and reduced your lung capacity to something like that of a person politely drowning. You could not slouch, could not slump, could not fully exhale. You spent the entire day held rigidly upright by a cage of boning and elastic, which certainly improved the posture and did no favours whatsoever for the internal organs. The gowns themselves, for all their beauty on screen, were frequently miserable to inhabit. They could weigh an astonishing amount, laden with beadwork, heavy fabric and elaborate construction, so that a woman gliding weightlessly across a set was in fact hauling several extra pounds of costume with every graceful step. Under the hot lights, these gowns became sweltering, and the sweat had nowhere to go, trapped beneath layers that could not be removed between takes without ruining the look. You suffered inside a masterpiece, and you smiled while you did it. The shoes deserve their own particular condemnation. High heels are a marvel of engineering designed with apparently no input from an actual foot. And the ones you wear for a dance number are worse still because now you must leap and spin and glide in them for take after take across a hard floor. The pain accumulates in the arches, the toes, the ankles, the back, building through a long day until walking normally at the end of it feels like a foreign skill. Dancers of the era famously performed complex routines in heels, while also, of course, moving backward, an achievement roughly comparable to running a marathon on stilts while being filmed. The men were not entirely spared, though their torments were quieter. A leading man might be laced into a girdle of his own to smooth his line, padded to broaden his shoulders, perched on hidden lifts to add inches to his height, and squeezed into a stiff collar and tailored suit under those same cooking lights. The rugged, effortless masculinity on screen was, like everything else in this town, a careful construction held together with discomfort and safety pins. Nobody, regardless of gender, got to be comfortable and beautiful at the same time. You could pick one, so you master the great skill of the era, which is to suffer invisibly. You learn to breathe shallowly inside the corset, to shift your weight off the screaming foot when the camera is not on it, to project serene delight from a body that is quietly staging a rebellion. The glamour was real, and it was gorgeous, and it hurt the entire time, and yet the corset and the heels were merely the discomfort you could feel. Some of what glamour demanded of your body was slower, quieter, and far more dangerous, painted directly onto your skin in the name of beautiful colour. The colours on screen are dazzling, and the price of that dazzle is caked directly onto your face. Early colour film is so unforgiving that the makeup must be layered thick as frosting, in shades that look alarming in person and perfect through the lens. Some of the powders and paints of the era contain ingredients no sensible person would willingly put near their skin, and you are wearing them for hours a day, every day, under those cooking lights. Your pores stage a quiet rebellion. The makeup artists respond with more product. Beauty in Technicolor is a chemistry experiment conducted on your face, and nobody has bothered to check whether the experiment is entirely safe. The trouble begins with the film itself, which sees the world nothing like the human eye does. Early colour processes rendered ordinary skin as strange, washed out, and lifeless. So the makeup had to overcorrect wildly, piling on tones that in the daylight made you look like a sunburned clown, but on screen resolved into flawless, glowing perfection. You would sit in the makeup chair being transformed into something that appeared grotesque up close, trusting entirely that the camera would perform its magic and turn the mask into a face. It is a strange act of faith, letting someone paint you orange and promising the world will thank you for it. And that makeup went on thick. We're not talking about a light dusting of powder, but a full sculptural layer, a heavy foundation troweled over every visible inch, sealed and set and reinforced throughout the day, so it would not slide off under the heat. Your skin spent the working week suffocating beneath a dense coat of pigment, unable to breathe, unable to sweat properly, held hostage to the demands of colour film. The pores did not enjoy this. Breakouts, irritation, and long-term damage were simply part of the arrangement, treated by applying yet more makeup to hide the harm the makeup had caused. The genuinely sinister part is what some of these products actually contained. The cosmetics industry of the era was largely unregulated, and formulas that would horrify a modern chemist were smeared onto famous faces without a second thought. Ingredients now known to be toxic, heavy metals and harsh compounds among them, turned up in the paints, powders, and treatments of the age. Nobody was testing the long-term effect of wearing this witch's brew for 10 hours a day across a 20-year career, because the priority was the look, and the look was achieved, and the consequences were a problem for later. Then add the lights back into the equation, because the lights and the makeup conspired against you together. Under that blazing artificial sun, the makeup had to be even heavier to survive the heat, and the heat in turn drove whatever was in the makeup deeper and harder against your skin. Hour after hour, day after day, your face endured a combination of chemical assault and thermal punishment that would make a modern dermatologist weep openly. The radiant close-up that made audiences gasp was, up close and in truth, the surface of a slow-moving disaster. So you sit in the chair each dawn and let them build the beautiful poisonous mask, because the mask is the job and the job does not care about your pores or your future. You glow on screen in colours richer than life, while your actual skin quietly pays the bill in installments. It is one more corner of this town where the dazzling result and the human cost point in exactly opposite directions. And if the studio was willing to risk your skin for a scene, you can be certain it was willing to risk considerably more than that when a shot called for genuine danger. If a scene calls for danger, the studio has a comforting philosophy about it. The show must go on, ideally with you still in it. Safety equipment is minimal, common sense is optional, and the phrase "we will fix it in editing" does not apply to broken bones. Stars are quietly expected to do things that would make a modern insurance agent faint, and when someone gets hurt, the machine simply patches them up and rolls again. A sprained ankle is walked off, a bad fall is buried in the trade papers, and the smile goes right back on. The magic of the movies, it turns out, runs on a steady supply of people willing to risk their necks and not complain about it afterward. Consider the conditions these dangers unfolded in. There were no rigorous safety protocols, no dedicated departments whose entire job was making sure nobody died today, none of the careful padding and rigging and rehearsal that a modern production would insist upon. There was a director who wanted the shot, a schedule that could not slip, and a performer expected to deliver. If the shot involved fire, water, height, horses, or moving vehicles, you did it, often with protections that amounted to little more than crossed fingers and a nearby bucket. The stunt work itself was frequently genuine. Long before the era refined the art of doubles and trickery, stars performed a great deal of their own dangerous action, partly for authenticity, and partly because the culture simply expected it. You might be dangling from a real height, leaping onto a real moving train, wrestling a real animal, or riding a real horse at speed across uneven ground, all while a camera captured every second, and a director urged you to make it look convincing. Convincing in this business often meant actually doing the terrifying thing, and when the terrifying thing went wrong, the response was appallingly casual. Injuries that would halt a modern set and summon investigators were, in the Golden Age, treated as minor interruptions to be managed and hidden. A performer would be strapped up, dosed with whatever the studio doctor had handy, and sent back to finish the day, because stopping cost money, and money was the one thing the studio genuinely could not tolerate losing. Serious harm was smoothed over in the press, downgraded to a small mishap, lest the public worry, or, worse, lest a star develop a reputation for being fragile. The dark truth is that some of this danger was not survived at all. Across the era, performers and crew members were badly hurt, and, in the grimmest cases, killed in the pursuit of a shot, and the industry's instinct was frequently to control the story rather than confront the practice. A death on a production was a public relations problem to be handled by the same men who handled everything else, the fixers and the publicists, ensuring the picture reached cinemas with its glamour intact and its human cost tucked safely out of view. So you throw yourself off the ledge, or onto the horse, or into the water, because the show must go on, and because refusing marks you as difficult, and difficult is a death sentence of a different kind. You trust a system that has already shown you exactly how much it values your survival, which is to say precisely as much as your survival contributes to the box office. The physical risk was real and constant, but at least it was visible. The next indignity was subtler, a quiet reminder that no matter how famous you became, you were never anything more to the studio than a piece of property to be loaned out at a profit. Just when you think you understand your place, the studio reminds you that you are property, and property can be lent. If another studio wants you for a picture, your studio can loan you out, pocket a tidy fee, and pay you the same modest salary as always. You have no say in which film, which director, or which distant lot you are shipped off to. You're handed over like a library book, used and returned, and the profit from the whole arrangement lands in someone else's account. It is a humbling reminder that your fame belongs to you far less than it belongs to the men who invented it, and that a star in the end is an asset with a very nice smile. Here is how the arrangement worked, in all its cheerful cynicism. Suppose a rival studio is making a picture and decides that you, specifically, are the face it needs. It does not come to you. It goes to your studio and negotiates a price, treating you as exactly what the paperwork says you are, an item in someone else's inventory available for temporary rental. Your studio, ever the savvy businessman, agrees for a handsome sum, and you find out where you will be working next, not by being asked, but by being told. The financial insult is the part that stings the longest. When you're loaned out, the fee the rival studio pays can be far larger than your own salary, sometimes several times over. but that windfall does not flow to you. It flows to your studio, which keeps the difference and continues paying you the same fixed wage set back when you were a nobody. You're generating a fortune for two separate companies in a single transaction, and your cut of that fortune is exactly what it always was. You are the goose. The golden egg belongs to management, and you are lucky if they toss you some feed. There was occasionally a crueler use for the loan out, and the shrewder stars learned to dread it. A studio could deploy the loan as a punishment, banishing a performer who had become troublesome to some lesser production, a cheaper picture, a poorer role, a way of reminding an ambitious star exactly who held the leash. Refuse a part you hated and you might find yourself loaned to something worse, in a genre you loathed, far from the prestige projects you craved. The loan out was a carrot and a stick, and management held both ends. What made it truly galling was the total absence of your consent at any point. This was your career, your face, your talent, your name, however invented that name might be, and decisions about where all of it went were made in rooms you were not invited to enter. You could be a beloved leading star, worshipped by millions, and still have less say over your next 6 months than a factory manager has over a shipment of parts. Fame, you keep discovering, is not the same thing as freedom, and in Hollywood the two are often complete strangers. So you pack your bag and report to whichever lot you've been rented to, and you do good work for a studio that is not yours in a film you did not choose, while two sets of executives split the money you earned. You smile, because smiling is the job, and you file the resentment away with all the other resentments. And if you're quietly hoping that at least the fame is making you rich enough to justify all this, prepare for one final disappointment, because the money in your own bank account is nowhere near as large as the whole country assumes it is. Everyone assumes you're rich, and everyone is mostly wrong. The fan magazines print dizzying figures, but the reality arrives after the studio deducts for your coaching, your wardrobe, your dentist, your publicist, and the weeks they simply decided not to pay you. Many stars whose faces fill every cinema in the country are quietly living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of the day the checks stop. You cannot renegotiate because the contract is airtight and the studio holds every card. So you keep up appearances because a star who looks broke is a star with a problem, and you smile from the back of a borrowed car while wondering how you will cover next month's rent. The gap between the printed fantasy and the private reality is enormous. The magazines love to dazzle readers with tales of colossal star salaries, because colossal star salaries make for delicious reading and reinforce the dream. But those headline numbers, when they exist at all, tell you almost nothing about what actually reaches the performer's pocket. The contract that bound you set your pay when you had no leverage whatsoever, and it stayed stubbornly modest even as your fame and your box office value soared far beyond it. The studio got the upside. You got the same envelope as always. Then come the deductions, and there are so many deductions. All that grooming and training the studio provided, the coaches and the diction lessons and the dance instructors, was frequently charged back against you in one form or another. The wardrobe, the publicity, the endless polishing of your image, all of it had a cost, and a surprising amount of that cost had a way of landing on your side of the ledger. You were being invoiced for your own manufacture, paying the factory that built you out of the wages the factory paid you. And do not forget the suspensions, that favourite weapon from the contract. Every time you refused a role and were suspended without pay, your income simply stopped. Sometimes for weeks or months, while your expenses carried right on. A star could go from the cinema screen to genuine financial anxiety with a single act of professional backbone, which was precisely the point. The threat of an unpaid suspension kept even wealthy-sounding performers in a state of quiet economic fear, ensuring they thought very carefully before ever saying no. Meanwhile, the image itself demanded to be fed, and feeding it was expensive. A star was expected to look like a star at all times, to dress the part, to be seen in the right places, to project effortless prosperity to a public that adored the fantasy. Keeping up that gleaming surface cost real money, and so a performer might pour much of a modest income straight back into the appearance of a lavish one. You were spending to look rich because looking rich was part of the job, and the looking often cost more than the being, so you lived the strange double life of the not quite wealthy famous person, beaming from magazine covers while privately doing sums at the kitchen table. The whole country believes you are swimming in money, and you cannot correct them, because admitting the truth would puncture the very illusion that keeps you employed. It is a peculiar poverty, dressed in silk and photographed constantly, and it comes with a special kind of dread, because you understand better than anyone how fragile it all is, how completely your survival depends on the studio's continued interest, and how quickly that interest can curdle once it decides it has seen enough of you in one particular role. You finally became a success, and the reward is being sentenced to play the exact same person until the end of time. The studio found a version of you that sells, and now it refuses to let you be anything else. If audiences loved you as the sweet girl next door, then the sweet girl next door is your sell, and every script that arrives is a slightly different wallpaper on the same four walls. Beg for something meatier, and you're reminded gently of paragraph 4. Ambition is fine, they say, as long as it stays profitable and predictable. So you smile that same smile in that same role, watching the years pass, slowly realizing that the thing that made you famous has quietly become the thing that traps you. The logic behind the trap is coldly commercial. Once the studio discovers a formula that reliably fills cinemas, it becomes deeply reluctant to gamble on anything different. Why risk audiences on a new version of you when the old version is a proven earner? So it casts you again and again in the same kind of role, the same kind of story, the same emotional register, wringing every last ticket out of the persona that worked. To the front office, this is not cruelty. It is simply good business, and good business has never much cared about an actor's creative soul. For you, though, it becomes a slow suffocation. You are an artist who longed to stretch, to surprise, to play villains and saints and fools and everything between, and instead you are handed the identical part for the 5th time, the 10th time, the 20th. The lines change, but the person does not. You could perform this role in your sleep, and some days you very nearly do. The work that once thrilled you calcifies into a routine as fixed and joyless as any assembly line, only with better lighting and a smile you no longer feel. And the contract, as ever, slams the door on escape. You cannot simply take a daring role at a rival studio to prove your range, because you belong to your own studio, and it will not lend you out for anything that threatens the profitable image it has built. You cannot refuse the endless similar scripts without risking suspension. You are boxed in on every side. Your ambition treated as a mild inconvenience to be managed. Your desire to grow as an artist filed under problems that do not concern the box office. There is a particular tragedy in being trapped by your own success, which is that you cannot even complain about it convincingly. You're famous, adored, employed, and comfortable enough on the surface, and the world has little sympathy for a beloved star who feels creatively imprisoned. So you swallow it. You keep playing the part, keep collecting the applause meant for a character rather than for you, keep quietly grieving the artist you might have become in a system that let you try. The persona wears a groove into your life until you can barely remember wanting anything else. And all the while another clock is ticking, one even the most bankable persona in the world cannot outrun. Because the studio's affection for you, for the type it trapped you in, for your face itself, was always conditional on one thing above all others, one thing you are steadily and helplessly losing with every single passing year. The industry adores youth, and youth, unlike a contract, cannot be renewed. Nobody says it directly, but there is a timer running, and it runs fastest for the women. Hollywood adores youth the way a magpie adores something shiny, and it discards it just as thoughtlessly. The roles that once came easily begin drifting toward younger faces, and the studio that once fussed over you starts returning your calls a little more slowly. You're still talented, still magnetic, still very much a person, but the machine has decided that your particular sparkle has a shelf life. It is a cruel arithmetic, being punished not for any failure but simply for the passage of ordinary time. And the worst part is watching it happen while everyone insists with great warmth that you have never looked better. The double standard was blunt and unmistakable. A leading man could age into silver-haired distinction and keep playing romantic heroes opposite women half his age well into his later years, his lines and his grey hair rebranded as gravitas. A leading woman enjoyed no such grace. The moment she edged past the narrow window, the industry deemed desirable, the great roles thinned, the offers cooled, and the parts on offer curdled from radiant love interest into somebody's mother, somebody's aunt, somebody's tragic has-been. The same lines that made a man look wise made a woman look, in the industry's pitiless view, finished. You feel it first in small ways, which makes it all the crueler. A script you would once have been offered goes to a fresh face you have never heard of. A director who used to pursue you grows suddenly vague about the timing. The publicity department that lovingly manufactured your every headline seems just slightly less interested in your comings and goings. Nothing is announced. Nobody sits you down. The machine simply begins, quietly and unmistakably, to redirect its attention toward the next crop of young arrivals stepping off that same bus you once stepped off. The insult is that none of this has anything to do with your actual ability. You have spent years honing your craft, and you are very likely better at the work now than you have ever been, more skilled, more subtle, more capable of genuine depth. But depth was never what the studio was selling. It was selling a face at a particular moment in its bloom, and faces stubbornly insist on continuing to age no matter how much money is at stake. Your improving talent counts for almost nothing against the one metric the industry truly worshipped, which was the calendar. And you must endure the decline while performing gratitude, because the town wraps its cruelty in compliments. Everyone assures you that you look wonderful, that age becomes you, that you are more beautiful than ever, all while the offers that actually sustain a career quietly evaporate. You are being eased toward the exit with a smile and a kind word, which is somehow worse than being pushed, because you cannot even name what is happening without seeming ungracious. The warmth is real, and the discarding is also real, and you are expected to accept both at once. So you watch the clock run down on something you did nothing to lose and cannot possibly get back, the simple fact of being young, which this industry valued above your talent, your loyalty, and your years of service combined. You know where it is heading. Everyone in this town knows where it's heading, and still, when the moment finally comes, it does not arrive with any drama or ceremony at all. It arrives cruelly as silence. One day, the telephone that ruled your entire life simply stops ringing. There is no grand firing, no dramatic scene, no final confrontation in a corner office. One day the studio just declines to renew your option, and the phone that once never stopped ringing falls silent. The parking spot with your name on it belongs to someone newer now. The publicist who invented your personality has been assigned to invent someone else's. You're still under the impression that you matter, right up until you realize the machine has quietly moved on without you and forgotten to send a note. After years of being told when to eat, sleep, love and smile, the sudden freedom is not liberating at all. It is terrifying because you were never taught how to exist as anything other than their product. The manner of it is what wounds most. You might have expected, after all those years of service, some acknowledgement, some ceremony, some human being sitting across from you to say the thing plainly and shake your hand. Instead, there is an option date on a calendar, and the date passes, and the option is not exercised, and that is the entire event. A contract quietly not renewed. A relationship that consumed your whole adult life ended by the simple absence of a signature. You gave them everything, and they gave you a lapse in paperwork. Then comes the silence, and the silence is deafening precisely because of what it replaced. For years, your telephone was a tyrant, ringing before dawn with calls to the set, calls from the publicist, calls arranging your dates and your appearances and your every waking hour. It was exhausting, and it was constant, and it was, you now understand, the sound of being wanted. When it stops, the quiet is total. You keep glancing at it, waiting for it to ring, and it does not, and slowly the truth settles over you like a cold fog. They are not going to call. They have simply moved on. And the machine moves on with breathtaking speed because the machine was never sentimental. The parking space, the dressing room, the little kingdom you occupied on the lot, all of it is reassigned within weeks to some fresh hopeful who just passed a screen test. The publicity department that lovingly crafted your invented biography turns its talents to inventing someone else's. The columnists who once feared to cross you now barely mention your name. You've been not so much fired as erased, edited out of a story that continues perfectly well without you. The cruelest discovery, though, is about yourself. You realize, standing in the strange new silence, that you have no idea how to be a person outside the machine. For years, the studio told you when to wake and when to sleep, what to eat and what not to eat, whom to love in public and what to say to a reporter, who you were and where you came from and what your very name should be. It managed your entire existence, and in doing so it quietly stole from you the ordinary human skill of managing your own. The freedom you always secretly craved has arrived, and it is a foreign country in which you do not speak the language. So you sit with the silent telephone and the borrowed sense of self and the dawning understanding that the great love affair of your life was, on the other side, a business arrangement that has simply concluded. It is a lonely, disorienting and frightening place to land. And yet, believe it or not, being quietly dropped was one of the gentler fates this town could deliver. There was another way for a career to end in this era, faster and more brutal, born not of aging or box office but of fear, suspicion, and a poison that seeped through the whole industry at once. As if the ordinary cruelties were not enough, a new kind of fear sweeps through town, and this one wears the mask of patriotism. Committees start demanding to know your politics, your friends, and your loyalties, and the wrong answer can erase your career overnight. A whispered accusation, a name on a list, an old membership in the wrong club, and suddenly no studio in the country will touch you. People inform on their colleagues to save themselves. Friendships dissolve in a single afternoon, and the whole industry learns to speak carefully and trust no one. The dream factory becomes a place of suspicion and silence, where the safest thing to have is no opinions at all, and the second safest is a very short memory. The fear arrived from outside the industry and settled into its bones. In an anxious post-war climate, powerful committees turned their attention to Hollywood, convinced that the movies were a channel for dangerous ideas and that dangerous people lurked among the writers, directors, and stars. They summoned people to answer for their beliefs, their past associations, the meetings they had attended years earlier, The causes they had once supported when supporting them was ordinary. To be called was itself a kind of sentence, regardless of what you said when you got there. The studios, faced with this pressure and terrified as ever for their public image, did not defend their people. They folded. Rather than stand behind the artists who had made them rich, they drew up lists of the suspect and the accused and quietly agreed among themselves not to employ anyone whose name appeared on them. A performer or a writer could find, without warning, and often without explanation, that every door in the industry had closed at once, that the phone would never ring again, that a career built over decades had evaporated on the strength of a rumour or a refusal to answer a question. Worst of all was what the fear did to people's treatment of one another. To save themselves, some chose to name others, to sit before the committee and offer up colleagues, friends and collaborators as suspect, buying their own survival with someone else's ruin. The community that had shared sets and secrets and long punishing days turned on itself. Trust curdled into suspicion. A person you had worked beside for years might be the one who spoke your name in that room, and you might never know for certain. Lifelong friendships shattered in an afternoon, and the wreckage lasted for decades. So the whole town learned to be afraid of itself. People stopped speaking freely, stopped signing things, stopped attending meetings, stopped holding opinions where anyone might hear them, because any word could be twisted and any past could be dredged up. The safest posture was a careful blankness, a public self scrubbed of anything that could ever be questioned. An industry that traded in bold stories and vivid characters grew timid and watchful, glancing over its shoulder, measuring every sentence before it left the mouth. Fear does that. It makes cowards of the frightened and informants of the desperate, and it did both here on a grand scale. Careers ended in this poison that had nothing to do with talent or beauty or box office, ended purely on suspicion and the studio's craven eagerness to appear clean. Good people were ruined, some never to work again, others forced to labour in secret under invented names. It was one of the era's genuine shames, a stain the glamour could not cover. And it revealed, more starkly than anything else, how little the studio's loyalty was ever worth when protecting a person conflicted with protecting the brand. That lesson, learned the hard way by so many, was the same lesson waiting at the bottom of every story in this town, including the seemingly harmless world of its glittering parties. After the 16-hour days there are the nights, and the nights are their own kind of work. The parties glitter with the right people, which means attendance is less a pleasure than a professional obligation. Deals are struck beside swimming pools, reputations are made and unmade over cocktails, and the alcohol flows like the studio is trying to drown its own conscience. You drink because everyone drinks, because it dulls the pills and the pressure and the constant performance of being delightful. It all looks impossibly glamorous in the photographs. What the photographs never capture is the slow toll of it, the toll that turns so many bright young arrivals into cautionary tales whispered about at the next party. Understand first that these parties were not really recreation. They were business conducted in evening wear, and attendance was close to mandatory. The right party was where a producer might take a liking to you, where a director might decide you were his next leading face, where a columnist might collect the item that made or unmade your week. To be absent was to be forgotten, and to be forgotten in this town was fatal. So you went, tired to your bones, and you performed charm and effortless fun for hours among people who were all doing exactly the same anxious performance. And the drinking was woven through all of it. Alcohol lubricated the deals, loosened the tongues, and softened the relentless pressure of being permanently on display. And so it flowed without limit at every gathering that mattered. For performers already caught in the studio doctor's cycle of pep pills and sleeping pills, adding a steady river of liquor to the chemistry, was a genuinely dangerous business, though nobody around the pool was doing that particular math. You drank because it helped, in the short and treacherous way that such things help, and because refusing would have marked you as no fun, and no fun was its own small career risk. The glamour of these evenings was real and also entirely a surface. The photographs that survive show beautiful people laughing in beautiful clothes in beautiful homes, and every bit of it is true, and none of it is the whole truth. Beneath the shimmer was exhaustion, anxiety, competition, and a great many people quietly medicating a pain the industry had inflicted on them and then refused to acknowledge. The party was a stage like every other stage in this town, and the performance of carefree joy was often the hardest role any of them played. The toll accumulated where the cameras never looked. Night after night of this, year after year, layered on top of the pills and the hunger and the punishing schedules, wore people down in ways that eventually could not be hidden. Careers that had blazed brightly dimmed into decline. Health broke. The bright young arrival who once stepped hopefully off the bus became, sometimes, the sad story murmured about across the room at a later party, a warning wrapped in sympathy, a face that had shone and then had not. The town consumed its people and then gossiped about the wreckage. So you raise your glass among the glittering crowd and you play your part in the great nightly performance, aware even as you smile that this too is grinding you down, that the fun is a job, that the drink is a trap dressed as relief. The parties gave and the parties took, and over a long enough time they took considerably more than they gave. It is the same bargain the whole town offered, in the end just poured over ice. And that bargain reaches its final reckoning in the one question this entire glittering machine was built to avoid. What becomes of you once Hollywood has taken everything it wanted and decided it is done? So the contract is gone, the phone is quiet, and the town that built you has already forgotten your invented name. This is the part they never put in the fan magazines. Some drift into smaller roles, some into other lines of work, and some never quite escape the wreckage of the pills and the pressure and the years of being someone else. The lucky ones find a way to become people again, to answer to their real names and eat a full breakfast without guilt. But the town moves on regardless, endlessly hungry, already ushering the next bus of hopefuls off the curb and into that blinding California sun. The golden age was real, and it was dazzling, and it ran on the quiet grinding up of the very people whose faces it made immortal. The endings varied, and not all of them were tragic, which is worth saying honestly. Some performers, cut loose from the studio, discovered a second act they never could have had inside the cage. They found character roles that let them finally act rather than merely appear, or they left the business entirely for quieter, saner lives, and they looked back on their stardom with the wary relief of someone who had escaped a beautiful fire. Freedom, so terrifying at first, became for the fortunate ones a genuine gift, the chance to at last be an ordinary human being answering to their own name. For others, the aftermath was far harder. A lifetime of enforced hunger, of uppers and downers dispensed like candy, of alcohol poured at every mandatory party, does not simply vanish when the contract ends. The habits the studio built into you to keep you thin and awake and pleasant outlast the studio's interest in you by decades. Some never found their way clear of them. The very systems that manufactured all that on-screen radiance left real damage in real bodies, and no fixer was ever dispatched to clean up that particular mess, because that mess was no longer the studio's concern. And there was the deeper wound of having been, for so long, a person invented by other people. You spent years being told who you were, what you liked, where you came from, whom you loved, until the line between the real you and the manufactured one blurred past finding. When the machine finally released you, You had to go looking for a self that had been paved over in your early 20s and left buried ever since. Some found that self again. Some spent the rest of their lives defending the invention, unable to locate the person underneath, still performing a role for an audience that had long since gone home. Meanwhile, the town itself felt nothing, because the town was never capable of feeling. It is a machine, and a machine does not mourn the parts it wears out. Even as one star faded into silence, a fresh bus was pulling in, disgorging another crowd of hopefuls in their one good outfit, clutching their cardboard suitcases and their fragile dreams, ready to be renamed and renovated and starved and medicated and adored and eventually discarded in their turn. The cycle simply continued, indifferent and eternal, feeding on hope and producing beauty and quietly consuming the people who supplied both. That is the truth the Golden Glow was always hiding. The films are magnificent, genuinely, and the faces on that silver screen still shine across all these years with something that feels like magic. But the magic was made by human beings who paid for it with their names, their bodies, their freedom, and sometimes their whole selves, in a system that treated them as gorgeous, disposable machinery. So the next time one of those old films flickers to life, and some impossibly luminous star glides across the screen looking effortless and eternal, remember what that effortlessness truly cost. So there you have it. You stepped off a dusty bus with $11 and a cardboard suitcase, and by the end you had lost your name, your face, your diet, your sleep, your private life, and very nearly yourself, all in exchange for the chance to shine for a little while on a silver screen. You were renamed by a committee and renovated by surgeons. You were starved thin and pilled awake and painted with something faintly poisonous, then laced into a corset and sent out to glide across a ballroom as though none of it hurt. You smiled through arranged romances, whispered secrets to columnists who could ruin you, and lived under a morality clause that owned your very conscience. And when the town was finally finished with you, it simply stopped calling and turned to the next bright hopeful in line. It is easy to laugh at how absurd it all was, and we have gently all night long. But underneath the absurdity there were real people, remarkable ones, who endured all of that and still managed to create something genuinely beautiful. They gave us films that glow to this day, magic conjured out of hunger, exhaustion, and extraordinary human resilience. They deserve our wonder, and they deserve our sympathy in roughly equal measure. So tonight, as you settle into your own soft bed, free to eat what you like, sleep when you please, love whom you love, and answer only to your own true name, maybe spare a quiet thought for the luminous, weary souls who paid so dearly for that shimmer on the screen. Their glamour was borrowed, their smiles were often aching, and yet somehow, against every odd, they endured. And now, so gently, it is time for you to rest. Good night.